I love the season. So, how about you? You were talking about
All right. Well, welcome everybody to our second week of our Lenten class. It's great to see you guys, both online and in person. Let me share the screen to our friends online. All right. There we go. So, tonight's agenda is, of course, to welcome everybody back. Also do a little bit of check-in, see if there was anything that kind of lingering, either questions or observations that came up from last week's kind of introduction to the class and our reading of Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem, what we often kind of refer to in our worship as the events that inspired our Palm Sunday service. So that's going to be our recap and review. Oops, I didn't want to do that. Okay. I want to add to our weekly agenda because I think it's worth calling out what parts of Holy Week kind of become the inspiration and kind of the regular rhythm of our Holy Week observances, or just kind of our Christian practice, right? Because I think on one hand, yes, we do have a Maundy, Thursday service here at St. Stephen's, and we do commemorate the mandate. That's where Maundy, we'll talk about this in 2 weeks, but Maundy, Thursday comes to us from the Latin word for mandate, which is a command. I give you an order. The order from Jesus is love one another. So we do have a Maundy, Thursday service, but also we commemorate the Last Supper every Sunday when we celebrate a Eucharistic worship service, right? Every service in some way is a reminder of what happens on Maundy, Thursday night. And so as we go through the week, what I kind of wanted to do as we walk through the events of Holy Week, I wanted to kind of call out, when do we celebrate this, or does it kind of get passed over? Sometimes the answer is very clearly yes. We do a Palm Sunday service. We make a big deal out of it. Other things like the teaching, sometimes in some liturgical years, so we have 3 years, A, B, and C. We're happy to be in year A, which is principally why we're reading from the Gospel of Matthew this year. Next year is year B, where we hear mostly from our friends Mark and John. And then in year C, we read predominantly from the Gospel of Luke. Like our Sunday Gospel readings changing every 3 years, our Holy Week lectionary changes every 3 years. So sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes the answer is no. Also, what we're going to see a lot next week is we do read these readings quite a bit in our lectionary, but they are completely divorced from the Holy Week setting. It just happens to be the readings we get to in October and November most years. So we'll walk through that, but add that to our agenda. And then we're going to talk a lot about the cleansing of the temple tonight. We also are going to, just as a bit of an introduction, we're also going to talk a little bit about, this is one of those stories in Holy Week where we see a divergence between our gospel writers, what we call the evangelists. I'm going to assure you that it's nothing to be afraid of. It's something to be quite proud of. But we're going to talk through what the spine of the story is, what do all 4 evangelists have in common, and then we're going to talk through kind of the diversity of opinion of what's going on here. Both when it happens, what happens, who is Jesus angry at, and what might it mean not only for Jesus, but to those people who witnessed it and those people who heard about it as well. So, great. And then, of course, what we're also going to talk about is risk. This is, I think, one of the main reasons why I like AJ or Professor Levine's work so much, is it does highlight the risk that's going on throughout Holy Week. So we'll talk a little bit, particularly at the beginning and at the end of the class, about what is Jesus risking at this moment. And throughout, we're also going to kind of try and draw out the meaning of what is happening here. It's slightly different from what meaning Jesus may have intended with the entry into Jerusalem. Here, it might be something else. So with that, are there any kinds of, anything kind of come up for anybody? Some wonderings, some things changed from last week, things that kind of stuck with you, bothering you, some revelations. I've never thought of it this way, but now I had a cool thought. How are people feeling about last week? Any lingering questions first? No? Okay.
Yes,
Yeah,
colt and a donkey.
yes.
Do we really have two animals? Does it matter that we have two animals? Does anybody have any proof one way or the other that there were two? Or people having double vision?
Yeah,
Want to back up to the next one? I mean.
so the number of livestock differs from gospel to gospel. In Matthew, it's very explicit. There is a colt and a donkey. Matthew is likely a Jewish scribe, and the reason why we think he's a Jewish scribe is Jesus calls out a few different offices in the temple leadership. He calls out the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, and the priests. Except in the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus very rarely says a bad word about scribes. And that seems to be a pretty good clue that he himself is one. He's also the most well-versed in Jewish scripture and quotes Jewish scripture more than any other evangelist. So the psalm that we talked about, Psalm, I think it's 95, talks about a colt. It uses what's called a kind of a Hebrew doublet of repeating the phrase to emphasize it. He wore an extravagant coat, right? But Matthew reads it literally, and so he's got a colt and then a donkey and a colt, both of those animals. In John, it's just one donkey. So it goes back to the meaning that they're ascribing to Jesus' actions here. Is Jesus the perfect, do we see the writings of Zechariah, the Psalm, as being not just prophetic, but divine imagination of what Jesus will do in Jerusalem in 33 AD? Or is it more Jesus recognizes these are the trappings of and the markings of a royal parade? I want to inhabit those, and so people will get the reference. But it's, I think that's kind of where the variance between the Gospels lie. Yeah. Yeah. Great question. Thanks. Any others? Yeah.
This may just be a trivial point, but I remember Jesus riding into Jerusalem on the donkey has association with the royalty.
Yes.
This makes me, how did a donkey ever come, rather than say my mighty horse or a camel or something, or a chariot, how does a donkey, or is that just the way it was? I mean,
Yeah, so it's we're quoting Zechariah, and so in there is the kind of, there both is and is not the association with the donkey and meekness. So I think in Zechariah, it's possibly there it's more there in the Psalms than it is in the prophets. But all that being said is it absolutely is a royal image. It's just a different connotation, right? Like, I mean, as Americans, the trappings of power in the United States are very different than it is in England, right? Even though we have a shared historical heritage, but the president, the head of everything, lives in the big, nice house. In England, where the prime minister, who actually holds the power, lives in block housing on Downing Street, right? It doesn't have those trappings of power. The monarch has those, but the monarch is kind of a figurehead, you know, and so the things we associate with power, I think, vary culturally, and to the ancient Israelites, that was a royal image, not one of meekness didn't figure into it explicitly, but the royalty does. Yeah, good question.
So we just have to adjust our perspective on that.
Yeah, it's not, this parade wasn't for 20th century or 21st century Americans. This parade was for, you can't even call it first century Israelites, because they didn't know it was the first century then. So, yeah. Hey, everybody. So right now we're just asking questions. Anybody want to raise their hand or unmute to ask a question online? If not, well, no worries. Okay. All right, well, if anything comes up, just ask away. Any aha moments over the course of the week? Anything we saw differently?
You had said, and I probably will use the wrong word, but that when Jesus came, you know, was on the donkey and whatever, you kind of instigated the whole, yeah, and I've never thought of it that way.
Okay.
But
Is that,
it's not like-
is it provocative in a good way or a bad way?
I don't know, it just made me think all week about it.
Okay.
It's very difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think
I
that,
was never, I never, in my, you know, I grew up in the Catholic Church and like, it was never presented that way. No.
yeah, I mean, I think it goes back, this is a repeat from last week's slide. For me, you can't, sorry, I've got too many minutes. You have to get Jerusalem to a place where people are anxious and ready to execute Jesus. And you don't do that with a homecoming parade for the most popular kid in school. I really think that this is, and I think what I'll try to show by the end of tonight is there is, whether or not I would label Jesus as a provocateur, and depending on the timeline of the Gospels, either by Palm Sunday night in Matthew and Luke, or the next day in Mark, or 3 years earlier in John, Jesus has managed to tick off both the government structures and the religious structures that have control in Jerusalem. Whether or not he did that in order to be executed, or he simply did those things and that led to his execution, I'm not sure. Like, I don't want to paint Jesus as a provocateur, but at the same time, he knew that he has already predicted 3 times in all 4 Gospels, I am going to die in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And as I said last week, we don't execute Mr. Rogers, the ancient Near East. So at some point, Jesus knows either what is going to happen, how it happens and if he is the instigator or merely reacting to forces beyond his control is absolutely up for debate. I wouldn't be this like Jesus is a provocateur, just poking buttons, but he is upsetting people either intentionally or unintentionally. Yes, Barbara, question.
What is the title that we give Pontius Pilate? What is he?
He's governor of Judea.
He's governor.
Yeah.
Well, you know, in reading that chapter, it's interesting that there were choices of where Jesus could be judged.
Yes.
And they selected, I don't know, this is what I want to know, is who selected Pontius Pilate? And in there it describes, in some place in there, it seems like I read that Pontius Pilate was sort of weak. Yeah, he was weak, I think.
Oh, I would argue the exact opposite.
Would you?
Let me make sure we're being really specific on what and how we're coloring Pilate.
Yeah, okay.
Pilate has a reputation of being a merciless killer and
Yeah,
person who puts
I
down
should have said that first.
potential riots. That is absolutely his reputation.
Yeah.
He is a no-nonsense, we can talk about the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome, but the peace of Rome was often procured at the tip of a sword.
Yeah.
So in that regard, he is not weak at all.
No.
He has full resolve and has no problems killing people in order to make sure that Rome and Rome's interests are protected and all you minions are paying your taxes like you should. When it comes to his kind of personal weaknesses, is he bullied into it?
You're going more toward what I was.
So is he being bullied into it? Yes, maybe a little bit. I think when you read Matthew's gospel in particular, how many things would be improved by just listening to our wives? Maybe. Pilate in Matthew's gospel alone, Pilate's wife has a dream, have nothing to do with this person. If Pilate had done that, maybe we'd have a different story. But I think
I know I'm looking at
I
that.
would say what I know of Pilate, both in Scripture and extra biblically, from other historians of the time, is he did things in order to protect the peace that he wanted to achieve.
I know he was looking out for
Yeah.
himself, number one, and what he
Yeah.
was responsible.
But protecting the peace, it's a moral question of how do we achieve that peace? It's not through singing Kumbaya.
No,
Yeah.
that is true.
Yeah. So, thanks. Great question, Barbara.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mindy, question online.
Not so much a question, but when you grow up with a preordained job, as Jesus did grow up with, knowing that he was going to die, probably that meeting in the temple at the age of 13 when his parents couldn't find him solidified that for him. But when you know you're going to die, he has nothing to lose by antagonizing the Jewish religious leaders or the Roman leaders, whatever. And he, Nikos Kazantzakis has that scene where Joseph is making crosses for crucifixion. So he probably had a good idea, if that is indeed valid. That's a fiction.
Yeah, I mean, the thought I would challenge is when does Jesus realize he's going to die? I think that's my question. My response is I would have a hard time sustaining that he knew it at age 13. But obviously, by the time he's an adult, by the time he's making these predictions, he is aware. I would think, and again, you guys all know how many graduate degrees in psychology I own. So please take every grain of salt I offer that with. But I think what is really transformative for Jesus's thought process is what happens to John the Baptist.
Yeah.
His cousin John is executed by Herod, kind of out of lust. I mean, I don't want to, I don't want to discount the story that comes to us in Luke's gospel, which is the wife of his betrothed bride doesn't approve of this marriage. John is the voice saying, Herod, don't do this. John is popular, and I'll add way more popular than Jesus at this time. And so he kind of gets rid of him so that he can have the marriage he wants. But I think it's John's death, who I believe John was his mentor. That is probably when it is likely that Jesus thought, if I keep poking the bear, And whether it's the Roman bear or the temple leadership bear, I will probably meet the same fate. That's my sense of what and when Jesus is coming to the recognition of his own fate. I would have a hard time saying he knew it at age 13. That'd be the only thing I would kind of caution.
But Pat, when he rode in on the donkey, at that point, do you think he knew?
I mean, at that point, he's already predicted, so all of the
Right.
predictions of his death in Jerusalem happen before he enters it.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and in Luke's gospel, there's a pivot in Luke's gospel. It happens in chapter 11. Jesus sets his face to Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that stones and kills the prophets. He's, at that point, I'm going there and I'm marching to my own death.
Right.
And so, in all four gospels, Jesus has made predictions of his death in Jerusalem, and yet he continues to go to Jerusalem.
So you're saying he knew that was weak?
In the synoptics, absolutely. In John's gospel, more than likely, yes. The Jesus of John's gospel has gone into Jerusalem twice already. And both times he's upset people so much they try to kill him, but he escapes. And so maybe the question is am I going to escape, or am I even going to try to escape, or is this the time when I assent? I hate to, spoiler alert for this, I am already involving Star Wars in this tonight's class. Is this a moment of Obi-Wan Kenobi saying, this is how I die? And just, turning off the lightsaber, spoiler alert, sorry. You've had 39 years to watch the movie, so I don't apologize too much. But so is there an ascent to the death at this point? Maybe, likely, but I try not to psychoanalyze my Lord and Savior for many reasons. One is I'm not qualified to do so, but B, I can't. If God is both fully human and fully divine, I don't think the tools of psychology really apply. Is the best answer I can say. So,
Matt,
with only
you
being
said
half a
that
smart
word,
aleck.
Synopsis. I kept reading that. What is-
Synoptics, yeah.
Yeah, tell me about that word.
So it comes, so if you pull them together, syn means the same. It's where we get the word sync and synchronize. And optic is like glasses. They have the same view of Jesus.
Okay.
So if you look at Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they all have this very similar story. Jesus begins his ministry in and around Galilee. There's teaching, miracle working, and he moves to Jerusalem where he's executed. John is not only different with his geography, he's ping-ponging between Galilee and Jerusalem 3 times, but they're also just totally different stories. We have the feeding of the 5,000, and that's about it. There are very few shared stories between the Gospels other than that, sign and or miracle. So it's just, John just is totally by himself. But the other 3, they look the same, so the Greek word for looking the same is synoptic. So that's why we call them the synoptic Gospels. Yeah. That is a question that might be on Jeopardy, so when you win,
When you get on there.
when you win in Final Jeopardy, just remember the church that taught you that. So, okay. Okay, so what I want to start with for the cleansing the temple is this shared historical spine. That's kind of where we're always going to start. Where do our 4 Gospels agree on? It's pretty. 2 things. It's a short story, right? We could say this happens in a half hour or less. So the shared details are slim, but that's okay. Then we're also going to look at the unique emphasis of each gospel. And then the importance of the differences. Are these theological differences? Are these political differences? Are these pastoral differences? It is both Professor Levine's and my theory that the gospel writers the evangelists are trying to tell us something important in this gospel. It is often either a truth about Jesus's theological reality, our political setting or context, or what does Jesus mean to us as our Savior? So theological, political, or pastoral. And then the key question for the book and for our class is, what kind of Messiah and what kind of risk is presented to us in today or this week's story?
Matt, we can't see the screen.
Oh, thank you, John. Appreciate the heads up. All right, can you see it now? Oops.
Yes, we can see it now.
Okay, great. I feel like what I need is like 16 computers to run this class. So, all right. So this week we've got obviously the cleansing of the temple, and we hear this is likely inspired from the Gospel of John, because we see a whip of cords in Jesus's hands there. And so what is the spine of this story? It sounds almost rudimentary to put it in this sparse of terms, but Jesus arrives at the temple complex and interrupts the exchange of trade, overturning tables and driving out traders. It almost feels like sparse, but really that's the shared spine. And so while there obviously is a narrative spine, this story in particular shows a great deal of variance between the Gospels. And so we've got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John here. So what is unique to Mark's Gospel? For one, it does not happen on Palm Sunday. It happens on a different day. So Palm Sunday ends, the parade ends, and Jesus kind of goes to the Temple Mount, but and this is where I want to highlight risk. It's late in the day, is what Mark says. I get the sincere impression that there aren't enough people to make a scene. And so Jesus retires back to Bethany across the Kidron Valley and rests up, and he comes back to the Temple Mount the next day during the day when there is going to be a lot of activity and a lot of pilgrims. So that's the first major difference in Mark's Gospel. It happens on Monday, not Sunday night. Jesus entered, so here's the quote. Jesus entered Jerusalem and went into the temple courts. He looked around at everything, but since it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. One of the things that Mark's Jesus does is he prevents anyone from carrying goods through the temple. It's just kind of a detail that I want to highlight for all of us. And he quotes Isaiah 56. This is a house of prayer for all nations. The all nations is really important for Mark. And Jeremiah 7:11, you have turned this into a den of robbers. AJ in her book kind of tells us that the other way to translate this is kind of a cave of thieves, right? So it's very evocative of this is an Old West hideout for thieves and rogues, right? So what's unique to Matthew's Gospel? Well, for one, it does immediately follow the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, the Palm Sunday events. Matthew, interestingly, drops the all nations phrase from Isaiah and rather just says this is a house of prayer. The temple becomes a site of healing. People bring both the blind and the lame to Jesus to be healed, and they are. And it is also a location and event for praise. This is where we get the phrase out of the mouths of babes, right? Children come and recognize Jesus as the Christ. So the temple is a place not just of confrontation, but also healing and praise for who Jesus is. both temporally and theologically, it follows the events of Palm Sunday. Praise and identity. And then we also add in some miracles too. In Luke's gospel, it is the shortest version. It literally is, I think, 2.5 verses. He drives out those who were selling. He quotes the same Isaiah and Jeremiah combination that Mark does. There's no mention of money changers specifically, no mention of dove sellers, no overturned tables described. It's even shorter. I mean, that's why our common spine is so bare bones. Luke is kind of, there's not a lot of fat here. Luke's Jesus doesn't just leave immediately afterwards. He stays and teaches. Luke's temple is a place of teaching and the people's protection of Jesus, not just a dramatic confrontation. So just to kind of help show us where we're going. So next week, we're going to look at the teaching that Jesus does during the last week. And in Matthew and Luke in particular, this is where it is at the Temple Mount where a lot of this teaching happens. Matthew has by far the most amount of teaching happening at the Temple Mount. And it's basically like an arcade game of who's smarter than the Messiah? It's like, okay, lawyers, you go. Jesus, don't you know, don't you know, don't you know? Jesus, yes I do, yes I do, yes I do. He puts them all in their place. Okay, all right. Sadducees, you go. He flicks them away like flies, right? Okay, Pharisees, your turn, right? So there's a lot of teaching, but a lot of it is confrontational in Matthew's gospel. People keep trying to best him, he keeps besting them. So we're gonna talk about the teaching next week, but but it's also different of in Luke, the teaching happens immediately, and you would not be mistaken to think that teaching happens on Palm Sunday night. In Matthew's gospel, it's very clear that we're kind of knocking down pins one day at a time. All right, come on. See if you've got what it takes to beat me. You know, we start to get this kind of sense of there's a temporal spacing in Matthew's gospel that we don't see in Luke's. And then finally in John, we've got a lot of differences. The biggest one is that this does not happen during Holy Week at all. It happens 2 years earlier. Jesus cleanses, so when we're looking at, so it's it's the middle of Mark chapter 11, it's Matthew chapter 21, it's Luke, oh gosh, this puts me on the spot, but just for the sake of adventure, I'll say Luke chapter 17. It's pretty close, it's somewhere close to there. It's John chapter 2. It's right after the wedding at Cana. So it's totally different temporally. Has nothing to do with Holy Week, but we see a lot of the same things happening, but also some unique features. Jesus makes a whip of cords. It's the only gospel to mention Jesus takes an instrument of violence. It's the only time Jesus takes a physical weapon in his hands. We can stew on that for a second. He drives out the sheep and the cattle, as well as the dove sellers and the money changers. The animals, the livestock, are only present in John's gospel. He pours out the coins. He doesn't just overturn the tables. And he addresses the dove sellers separately. Take these things out of here. And it's the evangelist John, the author of the gospel, who starts to kind of color this scene with some commentary. So when we read John chapter 2, we get the account of what happens, Jesus doing all these things, But then we also get this commentary of this is inspired by Psalm 69, zeal for your house will consume me. They're making it clear that it's obvious to us that Jesus' own sense of protection for the temple as his Father's house is what is driving him to this violence and kind of critique and correction of the temple leadership. So it's an interesting kind of live, or at least captured live in the retelling of the gospel, why Jesus is doing this.
Now, what's the reason for the difference in the timeline of John? Like when this happened?
So it's a couple of things. I think John's gospel, the enmity between Jesus and the temple leadership is ongoing and constant for 3 years. They're trying, so this obviously is upsetting and provocative, and they decide we should really try our best to execute this person now. But Jesus has this, he's kind of slips through the net. It happens again in chapter 10. Jesus comes back to Jerusalem. Again, he's a voice of critique to the powers that be. They close in on him trying to kill, and he just kind of sneaks away. Why it happens so early is, so one of the things that's unique, I can't quite remember the times, but I'll get within 10, I promise. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, if you add them all up, Jesus uses the first person pronoun of I think 12 times. Jesus uses the pronoun I in the phrase I am 67 times in the Gospel of John. There's a coin flip chance I got that I absolutely right. I'll let you guys check, but I think it's 12 in all, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and 67 in John. It's just a different portrayal of Jesus. Jesus has these I am statements. I am the good shepherd. I am the vine. I am the gatekeeper. I am life, and I am the resurrection. And so what we're developing in John's gospel is this theology of divine presence in the person of Jesus. So what we also see here, most explicitly, and well, the way I'm going to get to this answer is, and we'll talk about this in a few slides. Jesus talks about the destruction of the temple during Holy Week. But it's only in John's gospel do we hear about the prophesied destruction of the temple at the cleansing. So Jesus not only, grabs a whip of cords and starts, driving people out, but he also says, this temple will be destroyed and I will raise it up in 3 days. And everybody said, like, what are you talking about? We've been building this temple for 42 years. You're not a contractor. But the commentary but he was talking about the temple of his body, right? And so I think what John is trying to do is the temple for the Jewish faith at this time was where God's presence on earth remained. And so by Jesus saying like, hey, destroy this temple and I'll build it up in 3 days, what he is effectively saying is God's presence is not in that room, the Holy of Holies. God's presence is me. And so I think it's a temporal theological claim of God is not there, God is in here, and when you kill my body, I will prove it. So I think that's one reason why it might be early. We're starting to see a theological claim around who Jesus is as the Son of God, and that's why it's made so early, is my best guess. And I bet you most professors would not throw me out of the room for saying something like that, which might be as good as I can get as a scholar. Yeah.
Wasn't John's gospel the last
Yes.
written, the latest?
Yeah, it's chronologically the last to be written. It was probably written somewhere between 90 and 105 AD.
Okay. And do you think any of that, because of when it was written, could change?
Oh, yeah. So I think, so the difference between, if we look at the chronology of when the Gospels were written, it's very likely that Mark is the only gospel that is written while the temple in Jerusalem still stands. So it's a coin flip, but likely that Matthew and Luke are writing after the temple is destroyed. And I'm going to get to this in a few slides, is Jesus's critique of the temple and its prophesied destruction, what I'll get to in a moment is, I think there is a legitimate difference between what and why Jesus made that prediction and how Christians have understood that after the fact. So there's a SAT word that if you haven't heard tonight, I'll teach you. It's called supersessionism. And it's the belief that not only has God kind of abandoned the election of the Jewish people through Jesus, and that Christians have now kind of superseded the Jewish population as God's chosen people. We'll talk about this in a few slides, but that argument is supported by a worldview that sees Jesus's critique and prophesied destruction as judgment on the temple and its leadership, rather than a Jewish critique of a Jewish institution, which was shared by other, we can separate out, God, it's not divine judgment and God is replacing Jewish people with Christians. It can also just be Jesus, like the authors of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Essenes, like Jeremiah, like other prophets. A lot of Jewish people had legitimate complaints and critiques about the temple leadership contemporaneously or in their own time. It has nothing to do with God saying, oh, I don't like this people anymore, yay for Christians. But I'll talk about that more in a few more minutes. So I'm going to warn you, we might be here till midnight tonight. You guys are asking some good questions. All right. So, as promised, let's get into some Star Wars. This is probably my favorite bit of biblical teaching in the Star Wars trilogy. So let's listen to Obi-Wan and Luke here for a moment. Please work.
How did my father die? A young Jedi named Darth Vader, who was a pupil of mine until he turned to evil, helped the Empire hunt down and destroy the Jedi Knights. He betrayed and murdered your father. Now the Jedi are all but extinct. Vader was seduced by the dark side of the Force.
Okay. Obi-Wan tells a young Luke Skywalker, someone named Darth Vader killed your father, Anakin. Spoiler alert. Anakin and Darth Vader are one and the same person. His father, Luke's father, is Darth Vader. Luke is not happy to hear this news, and he confronts Obi-Wan with this question.
Why didn't you tell me? You told me Vader betrayed and murdered my father.
Your father was seduced by the dark side of the Force. He ceased to be Anakin Skywalker and became Darth Vader. When that happened, the good man who was your father was destroyed. So what I told you was true, from a certain point of view.
Boom. I didn't know that was there, I apologize. This is what happens when you don't watch all 98 seconds of video clip. Don't know why Arnold, the Terminator, was in there. Sorry for the distraction. Right, so this is the most formative piece of philosophical teaching in my young life. What I told you was true from a certain point of view. One of the reasons why I love this book is because AJ or Professor Levine really finds comfort in the diversity of the Gospels. I think one of the things, and I blame Law and Order and CSI on this cultural phenomenon, but when we use the word eyewitnesses, and one eyewitness doesn't agree with the other eyewitness, what we start to think is that one of them is lying. And the truth isn't anywhere between them. Like her, I think that the diversity of the Gospels and their different perspectives, their different points of view, help us understand who and what Jesus is. Jesus is not a mirror for a whole bunch of reasons. One, that's kind of a violation of the second commandment. When Jesus starts to look like us in the mirror, we have a very real problem. But he's also dimensional. He's faceted. Jesus can be a person of incredible grace and patience, and he is also capable of being really ornery and kind of a jerk. And like, I don't want to underplay that. You know, hey, Jesus, your mother and your brothers and your sisters are here. I have no family, but the will of those who do the will of my Father are my brothers and my sisters. Like, that's a jerk thing to say to your mom. The good thing is Jesus hopefully will forgive all sins, including me being blasphemous like that. So I hope to see you all in heaven despite that opinion. But when we talk about the differences between the Gospels, their chronology, were there sheep and cows present? I really hope that our salvation does not hang on that question. And I do not believe it will. But when it happened, who was present, what are some of the details? The variety and the diversity of the Gospels are a gift to be treasured, not a problem to be solved. You heard this a lot last year. This is basically the thesis of last year's Lenten class, where the events of Jesus' death are very different and differentiated between the Gospels. It's a gift. It's not a problem. And so I bring that up not only to talk about the Gospels themselves, but also how we interpret the Gospels. Because I'll admit that I come to a different conclusion about the meaning of these events than Dr. Levine does. But I want to kind of pause there. What do we think about the kind of the diversity and the differences between the gospel accounts and the meaning of the event? Is it something that worries us, concerns us? You've been hanging out with me long enough. It starts to feel good. What do we feel about these differences right now? Yeah, Lori.
I love it because the focus to me is on the meaning, and when you read fiction and great works of literature, it's about the meaning. We know that the actual events are not true. And I'm not saying that they're not true, but it doesn't matter that if in John it comes at the beginning or later, but the lesson that's being taught or the meaning that we derive from it, to me. And this is a very new way for me to understand this, because I think for 40 or 50 years, I had great doubts about, being able to have faith again and to believe. This actually makes me be able to believe more than less.
Yeah.
But before, I think I looked at it like you described, like, well, you know, which one is right? They're all different. They don't know. They were born after Christ was, you know, around. But, so for me anyway, I'm not going too long. For me, I love the differences and this different perspective, the way looking at the space. Let me say they were different 50 times, differently. Anyway, to me, it provides more meaning. I love it.
Can everybody online hear the audience okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks, Betty. Anybody online, any thoughts about the kind of diversity and the perspectives in the Gospels?
Well, what strikes me is, I can just say quickly, is that as I've pictured over the years, the events of Jesus going in at Palm Sunday, my recollection and understanding has always been a melding of the Gospels, not just one in particular. And, you know, that's kind of crazy to think about it that way.
Yeah, thanks. That's a good point. Okay.
In modern day times, if you think about your own family and an event that occurred, and you look at siblings and perspectives about, you could almost look at a sibling who might recall something and say, were you even there? Because their perspective is so radically different than yours. Yet they're both valid.
Yeah. I would, except for the great Christmas cookie decorating debacle of 1992 in the Warren House, but that's a,
Well,
we are all on one page.
that's an outlier now and then.
That's an outlier, but all of us, Dad was really ticked off that day. That's all we can say there, so, yeah.
There should be, but they all give a different story.
Perfect, okay, whoops. All right, so not only do we have a diversity of kind of stories in the Gospels or perspectives, but I think what that also allows us and gives us the freedom to do is to have a diversity of opinion when it comes to interpreting these stories as well. And I think this is a moment in particular where I think that what Professor Levine is talking about here, I have a hard time squaring with my understanding of the story. So if you look on page 52, she talks about how the cleansing of the temple has 4 main points. And what she's really talking about is she's rejecting an interpretation that Jesus is rejecting the temple itself. And so she has 4 points. One is that Jesus did not reject the temple. He referred to it as his Father's house. He's not opposed to purity laws. In fact, he participates in them. When he heals people, particularly of Jewish faith, he instructs them, if they were ritually unclean, go and show yourself to the priest to make sure, and they will pronounce you clean. Jesus says nothing about the temple exploiting the population, and the temple complex had sites where Gentiles were welcome. All of those things are true, but I don't find them convincing as to Jesus is not rejecting or critiquing the temple or its leadership. So one of my problems is that when she's talking about Jesus makes the claim, this is my Father's house, those are sequential statements. So she quotes Luke chapter 2, when Jesus was 13 years old, so likely 20 years earlier. It's also in John chapter 2, it's the zeal for my Father's house, right? What it disallows is for Jesus to change his mind or his attitude about the temple from a 13-year-old to an adult. The law is not the temple is not the law. That is, I think, my biggest critique of this is Jesus can be a follower of the law, and I think he absolutely was, particularly if you read the Gospel of Matthew, right? Like, I did not come to abolish the law, but to perfect it, right? Just because Jesus sees the value of the Jewish covenant and its laws does not mean he didn't have a critique about the temple. Jesus doesn't explicitly claim that the temple is exploiting the population, but he clearly has a grievance with how it is operating. Right? If someone came to St. Stephen's Church on a Sunday and started kicking up a fight and throwing throwing our offering plates like frisbees, right? We would say he has a problem with the rector or how the church is being run. Right? Like this isn't like, oh.
Business as usual.
Yeah. This isn't performance theater. And so, and I think the other thing where most of my disagreement kind of lands is you don't quote a prophet who prophesied about the destruction of the temple and the inadequate covenantal, the failures of the covenant and the destruction of the temple without meaning it. Right? Like, I don't want to prove, like, it's the opposite of proof texting. When you quote Jeremiah, it is possible to take one quote. You don't have to take the whole gospel. But at the same time, if you're quoting Jeremiah, you need to know that Jeremiah spoke out adamantly against the temple and the political leadership of Israel at the time and said it had broken the covenant, it was not living into the covenant that God had given, and that is the reason for its eventual destruction. So, and Professor Levine does talk about, like, when the New Testament quotes the Old Testament, we need to understand the context. I feel like this is an area where I would like her to kind of apply this a little bit more thoroughly. I really see this as a, you know, you don't kick up this, like, earlier we talked about, is Jesus doing this as a provocateur? The reason why I can't say no is because he has a point. There's a difference between Banksy, right, an artist who's trying to make a big fuss in a public setting and trying to get yourself killed, and doing that, like, there's a lot of ways you can earn the ire of the Romans and get yourself killed in Jerusalem. The fact that you go to the temple to do it means something. So what she kind of alludes to but doesn't name explicitly is there is a theory that, so what she talks about is the practice of when you go to Jerusalem, particularly during Passover, and make an offering for sin, right? When you do that, the offering that you are giving to God needs to be, in a biblical term, spotless, right? If you're going to sacrifice an animal, it shouldn't have a broken leg. If you're going to sacrifice a bird, it should have all of its feathers, right? And so what happens is that you don't bring a dove from Jerusalem or from Galilee down to Jerusalem because it could get a broken wing. Maybe it flies off and you lose it. And so the animals that are offered in sacrifice at the temple are sold at the temple, but they can only be bought with the coinage of the temple itself. A lot of biblical scholars will think that the exchange rates were usurious. And that this is why Jesus in particular goes after the money changers, is because he thought it represented a taxing of people's faith. The honest answer is that's a good theory. I'm not totally convinced by it. I think the bigger problem is the covenantal relationship of offering a sacrifice that has no meat on it, to use a really bad pun. When you are like, so think about how we started off Lent. Is this not the sacrifice that I want?
Sorry.
That's okay. Right? Throughout history, throughout all of the prophets, for close to 800 years, the Jewish people had said, like, God, what is your problem? We are offering sacrifices. we are sitting in ash. Like, knock it off. Send these foreign invaders away. We are ritually doing the stuff you told us to do. And through the prophets, God says, I don't care about ritual. I am interested in ethics. Doesn't say this explicitly, but like, is this not the fast that I choose, to let the oppressed go free, to break the yokes of injustice, right? Like, these are the things that God is actually interested in. And I think it's possible to make this argument about Jesus critiquing the temple with and without the kind of exchange rate policies that might have been going on. I really think it's not about access or taxing on being in the presence of the divine in Judaism at this time. I really think this is a covenantal break, not a bad deal on a turtle dove. I don't want to dismiss that, but it also isn't central to Jesus's critique, in my opinion. So that's kind of my take on it. The thing I would really gently remind you, oh, it's one more slide. I've got a joke, save it for 30 seconds. Right, so this I talked about this before, but I'll mention it again. In all four Gospels, admittedly in different contexts, Jesus predicts the destruction of the temple. It's only in John's Gospel that it happens at its cleansing. In the Synoptics, it happens during the week. In the Synoptics, Jesus looks at the temple and says, not one stone will be left on another. And in John 2, standing in the court, he says, he will destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. The problem with the temple is what happens to its destruction as it is interpreted both theologically and politically. The temple falls at nearly, and so the other thing that's happening, so the temple is destroyed in the year 70, and in that same decade, and until that point, it's very important that we remember there are not yet Christians. There are Jewish Christians. The overwhelming question for the first generation of the church is do you have to be circumcised in order to gain the benefits of the resurrection? Jesus is the Jewish Messiah. Gentlemen, if you are going to be saved by the Jewish Messiah, you have to be Jewish. The church comes to an argument like, okay, we'll let Jews and Gentiles follow Jesus. Circumcision is not required. And so we start to there's where we start to think that Christianity is starting to kind of emerge out of a cocoon of Jesus is the culmination of Jewish prophecy. He's the Jewish Messiah. Those of us who recognize him remain Jewish. To a different understanding of Jesus is the Jewish Messiah, and we as his followers are Christians and heirs of the benefits that were promised by God to people of the law, but we now practice in a slightly different way. Also, to get you ready for my sermon in 2 weeks, in this decade between the 70s and 80s, people who claim to follow Jesus as Savior are kicked out of the synagogue. So you have these two events happening at the same time. You have the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. At the same time, followers of Jesus are being kicked out of the synagogue. Theologically and politically, these two things get enmeshed with the idea that the temple falls and the church is born. What happens is we read back into history this retrospective understanding that an internal Jewish argument about covenant fidelity becomes a Christian claim that the destruction of the temple itself was God's verdict on the temple and the church as its inevitable replacement. So this is what I was talking about earlier. It's called supersessionism. It's the idea that God is kind of electing and that the Christian position as God's favorite people is superseding the people of the Jewish faith. And we want to be really clear. We want to reject a supersessionist argument. That is not what I believe God is doing here. Next year in Lent, we'll read the gospel, we'll read Romans and we'll read Hebrews, those two epistles, and we will know that God has a place for both Jewish and Christian. It's all part of the same plan. But that's next year's Lenten class. So a better understanding of the cleansing of the temple, in my opinion, is that Jesus, in his own historical context, is absolutely operating within the Jewish tradition of a temple critique that does not, did not, and would not require him to be founding a new religion. Right? The joke I made about my sermon a couple of weeks ago is, remember, there was that tearaway calendar of, I'll give you the whole world if you just worship me. Wasn't Jesus talking? Jesus never says, worship me. It's a really good conversation to ask, did Jesus ever mean to found a religion? I'm not so sure sometimes. If we look at contemporary figures within Judaism, we can go back a few centuries to Jeremiah. We can also look at contemporary examples like the Essenes. That's the group who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's more than likely, but not absolutely provable, that John the Baptist might have been an Essene. All of these had written the temple off as corrupt. But again, the law is not the temple is not the law. You can critique the temple and its leadership without saying that God has abandoned the temple or the people who worship there. I think that we understand this as an internal Jewish argument conducted in Jewish terms using, not for nothing, Jewish scripture. Right? There have been many, many times in the scriptural history where God's people have been less than what God has asked them to be. That has not ended with the closing of scripture. Right? So, to this day, we can critique honestly and hopefully speaking the truth in love, even the church leadership when it fails. Saw a headline this afternoon. A heartbreaking, the Roman Catholic Diocese in Rhode Island has uncovered a massive amount of child sexual abuse, right? We as humans invited into representing God fail. For those of you who may think otherwise, I am not perfect, right? None of you laughed, that's good. None of you thought I was, perfect. Right, like, I'll even say it under oath. Yeah, we're doing our best, we fail. But even when the church fails, and fails seriously and sinfully, God has not abandoned the people who worship there. God's presence is more powerful than human sin. God's weakness is stronger than human strength. God's foolishness, to quote Paul in the first chapter of Corinthians, is wiser than human wisdom. So that's kind of don't want to get too heavy here, but when it comes to the critiquing of the temple, I want to be just really honest about what it is, what it isn't, and how Jesus might have understood it in his own time. I'm going to take a break there because it feels a little bit heavy. Any thoughts, worries, concerns? Nobody's crying that their rector isn't perfect, which is great. So, any questions online? Yeah, Betsy. Or John, as it might be.
Yeah, reading Levine and her description of what went on in the temple and the status of the outer part of the temple where a lot of people would be, I kind of got a different picture that I never had before, which is the outer part of the temple is a safe place to do business. So you imagine these sellers of pigeons or whatever being pigeon dealers across large areas of Jerusalem, let's say, and camping out in the temple as their headquarters, their operating business space, because it's a place where no one can bother them, and they can go off and do whatever corrupt practices they want to do outside the temple and don't get hassled for it. So it made me look at it in a slightly different way, not necessarily that they were abusing the people in the temple, but that they were, and she used some terminology too, basically hiding out there. Because I had a hard time reconciling the idea that suddenly all these sacrifices are bad when these are good Jewish people doing what they thought good Jewish people were supposed to do with sacrificing doves and whatnot. So
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that, John. Yeah, I think I think a lot of us are kind of, our expectations and our own experience of Christian worship sites kind of clouds what was the historical reality of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. I was trying to think of a good geographic way to put this. So imagine the village, Orinda Village. So from the outer edge of the Safeway parking lot, I forget what road that is. It's not Camino Sobrani, but what, in between FedEx and Safeway, and go back probably to at least the library, right? But in between Orinda Way and Camino Sobrani, right? That's about the size of the Temple Mount. So if you think about how our Saturday morning farmers market in Orinda, if somebody's by the park throwing over tables, does anybody at the Safeway parking lot really recognize what's going on? The size of the Temple Mount is really, I think that's one of the parts I appreciate about AJ and John, your thoughts as well, is the sense of, is it possible to make a scene on such a scale? Now, obviously, there's courtyards, there are things that both highlight and shade visibility. But yeah, the size of the Temple Mount is a really interesting piece to this that I think we as North American Christians, by and large, as big as Grace Cathedral is, yeah, everybody could see what's going on, or almost everybody, right? So, yeah, Cheryl, question.
That was one of the most surprising things in this chapter to me, because I guess I had always pictured the temple as a synagogue.
Yeah.
Should be a thing. Oh,
Acreage or something like that, but that was it. And the fact that it was football fields large.
Yeah.
That was very surprising, and that's what I was thinking, is something could be going on in one area, and the people that were, whatever they were doing, would never be aware of it, and life went on as it usually did.
Yeah, so I'm gonna change my, Mindy, I'll get to you in 1 second.
yeah, that's fine.
Let me just share a different screen. So here's a little bit of a rendering of the Temple Mount during Jesus's time. And, oh, sorry, you guys need to see this in the room too. Oh, this is gonna be, there we go. So now, there we go. Okay, so this is the Temple Mount. And I know it's not a high resolution graphic, but these little ants are people. So it gives you a sense of scale, not only of the temple itself, but also kind of, so like, this is the court of the Gentiles, right? It's this expansive space, and then, you know, the kind of permission restrictions grow the closer to the temple you get, right? So there's the court of the Gentiles, there's, trying to get my bearings here. I forget where the court of the women would be here. Sure, okay, so.
Katie's point,
It's
way
off
out,
screen.
way out back, it's way out.
Yeah. So anybody is welcome in kind of the outer courtyard. When you get into the inners, like this is reserved for the actual practitioners of Judaism itself, right? And then like into the temple, into the Holy of Holies, only the high priest. Right? And so there definitely is this kind of, if this is several city blocks wide and long, where is the money changing happening, and would anybody inside or around the corner have an idea of what's going on? No. The answer is maybe probably not. So, Mindy, you had a question. Thanks, Cheryl.
Yeah, I was just going to make a comment about this gal because she is a historian at Vanderbilt, which
Yes.
is interesting in itself. I think the fact, number one, that she's Jewish and she takes the time to look at the whole crucifixion process is extremely interesting. But then she points out some little tidbits, i.e., that temple was not just a temple, it was a meeting place. It was obviously a supermarket. It was, but the other thing that it was the bank. That temple served as the bank for all of the Jewish people. That right there gives some meaning to the joining of everyday life with a spiritual life. And what she points out is that when you're talking about his throwing the people out who were selling everything, a lot of people in the other parts of the temple wouldn't have known that because of the size. She's got some incredibly interesting insights that we don't get in our Christian Sunday schools.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I would just say is when it comes to a fight of intellectuals between me and a PhD and a professor of New Testament studies, I would side with the professor on most days, so.
Hey, Matt,
That's
Yeah.
a point.
Matt, it's just, if I could just jump on real quick, I think you make a good point about the size. Because I've had the fortune to be there, and I would argue that the size is much larger than what you just presented it at.
Okay, that's
I
good.
mean, it is a massive space.
Okay, great. Then, yeah, one of these days I'll get there myself. So.
I just sent you a map that shows it better.
Oh, okay, great. Cool. What I'll do is I'll maybe share that. I'll do a follow-up email to tonight's class so we get a sense.
42 years of building.
Yeah. So, kind of transitioning from divergence into convergence, I do kind of want to return to where Professor Levine and I agree, and that is the risk. So last week we saw how Jesus's actions were politically provocative. They were particularly because they were so scripturally evocative of a Davidic king, right? It's hard to have two kings in the same place at the same time. Jesus talked about serving two masters, right? You love one, you hate the other. If we are going to create a Jewish Davidic king that we presumably as Jewish people will love, it means that we are not particularly going to care for our Roman government. So this engages risking the ire of Pilate and his Roman government. And here on the Temple Mount, although years earlier in John, but again, the thing I would highlight is this is Jesus's the frustration of Jesus and the desire to kill him begins in John's gospel years earlier. It does not diminish. They are trying to kill him for years on end, and he keeps getting away. So Jesus is openly confronting either the religious leadership of the temple priests or critiquing one particular facet of it with the money changers in particular. It's not explicitly clear what Jesus is railing against. Is it one practice of the temple? Is it all temple leadership? Is one a microcosm of the whole thing? But why separate church and state when you can offend both Rome and the temple at the same time? Jesus is going to not only annoy both political and theological leadership in Jerusalem this week, he is going to keep pressing buttons. And I think, so this chapter, the book focuses mainly on Mark as a representative of the synoptics, and John is kind of John doing his own thing. Next week, we're going to spend a lot of time in Matthew. And in particular, we're going to talk about how Jesus is kind of not just a thorn in the side, but he's, to mix metaphors, he's twisting the dagger of the temple leadership. Class after class after class of temple leadership challenge him and his authority and his knowledge of Scripture, and all of them are sent away with their tails tucked between their legs because Jesus bested them. If Jesus is a mild pain in the rear end at the beginning of the week, he's going to continue to risk safety by continuing to threaten the powers that be. Admittedly, we're going to spend the next few days focusing on his theological, how he is frustrating the theological part of the story, the temple leadership, more than the Roman part, more than the secular government, well, secular, non-temple government. We'll see that play out. So, I hate switching apps.
You need 16 computers.
I need 16 computers. Okay, so kind of want to talk through when does this story come up liturgically? We don't ever celebrate, there isn't a cleansing of the temple day in church. So whether or not we agree with whether or not Jesus is critiquing the financial or the trade system of the temple, I'm going to argue that this story is far more persuasive in our collective memory of what is appropriate and inappropriate about church than we would ever like to admit. So, I really wish I had held these bullet points one at a time, but you've got to see where I'm going with this anyway. AJ asked the question that is really worth asking. We could treat it as a rhetorical question, or we can treat it as an honest one. What are the rituals that surround our offerings of money in church? Right? Is it, so the first reading in Lent, Ash Wednesday, give offerings in secret. Do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. What are our ushers doing? Publicly passing a plate. Right? And then we play trumpets and organs and all sorts of things with music to bring the money up to the altar. Right? We say a prayer. Right? Does that correct any moral or spiritual deficiencies? Right? So is it, or does it correct any kind of, so Jesus talks about like, don't do things publicly, right? Okay, we're doing it publicly. But is there value in saying, so we talk about, there's a disconnect between what we talk about what we're doing and what we say we're doing. When people who look like me ask for stewardship, right? You have resources that can help the church in its ministry and mission. All things come of thee, O Lord. It's not yours. Is that enough to correct it? Is admitting that the blessings that we have in our lives are not ours? We didn't earn it. We're blessed, right? My favorite story, my dad would share it as a preaching example all the time. Back in the 80s, a bunch of people would go or ask Lee Iacocca, who at the time was the head of Chrysler, he used to work in Ford, what is the difference between your blue-collar workers and your white-collar workers? And the questioner expected an answer about education or precision or insight, and he says the zip code they were born in. There is no difference between white-collar and blue-collar. The white-collar kids have more options. They didn't do anything, but they were lucky, right?
Stay in the right place at the right time.
Is saying a prayer, all things come of thee, and of thine own have we given thee, is that enough of a correction around how we talk and understand about our own understandings about wealth and money? I earn this salary. I'm really good at my job. How we talk about money is really interesting. The anxieties we have when we talk about money is really interesting. And I'll say this as rector with a little bit of humor, but also a little bit of an edge. There was a lot of anxiety that came up when we moved the annual meeting from the parish hall to the sanctuary. There were a number of us who were not comfortable talking about money in the sanctuary. We are dirtying. But if we're clean enough to ask for money from the pulpit, we better be comfortable enough to tell you about how we're spending it as a vestry and as a church. So this story, the cleansing of the temple, has shaped us in ways we may not always recognize. We do think that there is something inherently dirty or not spiritual, I mean mundane in the most dirty sense of the word mundane, of earth, not divine, not heavenly, earthy, dirty with all of that, about money. But we talk about how our stewardship of financial resources is a reflection of our spiritual maturity. But Jesus didn't like talking about money, right? So this is something that I say with a little bit of humor and a little bit of bite. Is this story is with us a lot more than we might give it credit for, because we have a hard time differentiating between, is Jesus critiquing money and spirituality and their nexus, or is it something more particular and contextual? I think a lot of us think it's broader than we might give it credit for. I had a couple people raise their hands. Fred, were you? Yeah.
I'm not particularly bothered by the rituals that surround offerings.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think Jesus was either, in the story of the widow and the widow's mite. And obviously, he understood that the running of the temple and the building of the temple cost money.
Yeah.
The criticism that resulted in advising, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, was a criticism of the people who used their ostentatious philanthropy to gain social status.
Yeah.
And that's consistent with other things.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Criticize people about.
Yeah, if you were at sorry to interrupt, if you were at the morning or the midday Ash Wednesday service, the word hypocrite is a theatrical term. It's like a Broadway. You're performing your piety rather than actually believing it.
Right.
I think when we talk about don't let your left hand know what you're doing, don't be a performative person of faith. Don't do this just to show off that you're doing them. That's what Jesus is really critiquing against.
The other point I wanted to make is that in most of the collections, no one really knows what goes into the collection plate other than the usher.
Sorry, I left a funny gag up in my office. Okay, sorry, continue, Brad.
And in the olden days, when we all gave money weekly rather than annually or by electronic means, we put it in an envelope.
Yeah.
So not even the ushers got to know.
Yeah.
So I don't think that the criticism would relate to offerings, but even to the extent that it does, it's part of this service that ends with the prayer reminding the people that money is useful, but remember from whence it came.
Yeah, I agree.
That said, I'm one of the ones who's still slightly uncomfortable with holding the annual meeting.
Yep.
In the sanctuary, or the convention,
in the cathedral?
Diacal in the cathedral. But I would not make a big point of it now, because I think both of them work.
Yeah.
I think ours actually works better than the one at the.
Ours works better because our meeting is shorter.
Oh, that's certainly.
Gospel according to Brad.
I'm so ticked off. I don't mean to call out or embarrass anyone, but in Sunday's offering, so this joke works on two different fronts. In Sunday's offering, someone put in 10 Turkish lira. I've got a paper bill from Turkey worth 10 lira. And so there's an invitation for a money changing joke. And there's a joke there about, we went online, it's worth 22.5 cents if we can get a good deal on the exchange. It will remain in my office till the next time we talk about this reading in the lectionary, and I need a prop, so. Donnelly's, is that a new hand up or a old hand left up?
Let me preface this by saying that Matthew chapter 6, verses 1 through 6 is my favorite passage in the entire Bible. And I feel like in the church, in the Episcopal Church, we do a pretty good job of avoiding the prospect of people, trying to gain status by donating. I belong to another organization, which I won't mention, where there is so much emphasis on bling to identify donors that really is a little bit gross. So I think we do well around keeping offerings confidential. I will say the annual meeting in the sanctuary, the first time we did it, seemed a little bit weird. But once you see that the number of people who attend is so much better, even though we're taking a moment out of worship to do something that seems very secular, I think it's worth it.
Yeah.
And
I'm Machiavellian that way.
When we were in Italy,
John.
we went to an Anglican church where after a few months, the rector realized we were Americans and said, "Oh, you're just the people I was looking for. We need to do a stewardship campaign, and you Americans are very good with money." So our fame procedures. We did
Matthew, John, can you give us the Matthew 6 is the lily of the valley, or
no,
the
Matthew 6 is the when you give alms, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, and the ones about putting, when when you fast, put oil on your head, and don't be the ones that go out all sad and depressed.
Okay, yeah. So it's the Ash Wednesday reading. Yeah.
Yep. It's the main reason
And
I
I think
come
it
to
also
church
ends
on
with,
Ash Wednesday.
don't stress about life, what you will wear, all that good stuff. Yeah, great. All right. Well, just noting the time, we're already over. So wanted to I will send out this via email because I think it's a little awkward to kind of tell you what to read. So next week, we're going to be talking about the riskiness of Jesus's teachings. And so the basic thing to look for is the first half of Mark chapter 11 is the entry and the cleansing of the temple. So for Mark, we're going to be reading the end of chapter 11 and chapter 12. In Matthew, we're reading chapters mostly 21 and 22. There's a lot of teaching that happens in Matthew. In Luke, we're in chapter 20. And in John, just be honest, we're not going to deal a lot with John next week. There's a little bit about Jesus' authority and identity. And there's some public teaching before the Passion, but I will share this out. I'll put it in the weekly e-news. It'll come out on Friday. And we'll put it in the bulletin. Like to prepare for next week, obviously read chapter 3. And then if you can read these, we'll hyperlink them in the e-news so you can go right to them. Are there any kind of closing questions, thoughts, worries, aha moments, any of that stuff tonight? Yes, Kathy.
I love this book and I love the author, but I just see her wanting to hold on to Jesus as a Jew.
Oh, absolutely.
And culturally, I feel her connecting. And I just like that experience.
Well, yeah, no, I think and that's why I really, she's both personally and intellectually really intriguing to be a Jewish woman, but a professor of New Testament theology. But it's a wonderful reminder that Jesus was Jewish. I think sometimes we kind of forget that point. And not only was he Jewish, but he was faithful in his Judaism, right? Like when we hear the stories of Jesus is brought to the temple in Jerusalem, that Mary and Joseph offer the gift of thanksgiving for the delivery of a safe child, to have him named in the temple. He's circumcised. He, goes to temple with his family for the Passover, presumably annually growing up. Like he is a person of deep faith, grounded in Judaism, and sometimes we kind of forget that Jesus wasn't a Christian. So, yeah. So, all right.
She's an Orthodox Jew. Not just
Oh, really? I don't think I picked up on that.
She's Orthodox. I don't know how she does everything she does by still being observant, but she is.
Okay, cool, yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, the reason I chose the book was, I think she's got a lot to offer us on a number of fronts. So I'm glad you guys are enjoying it so far. All right. Well, with that, go in peace. Thank you for being here tonight, and we'll see you next Wednesday, 6 in person for the meal, 6:30 for the class. And thank you all for joining online.